Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Educate 360. Welcome to today's webinar, an introduction to CompTIA A+, presented by our amazing instructor, Scott Rake. We are using Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use that chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A portion after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. I will now hand it over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much. So as Mariella said, good morning or good afternoon. Hopefully nobody is in any type of extreme time zones that require significant adjustments to your normal routine. But if so, thank you for being here. As was said, this is sort of our introduction into the CompTIA A+ certification. And I think one of the most important things that everybody needs to be aware of kind of early on is the A+ certification actually requires passing two separate exams. You have an exam known as the 220-1101. Don't have to worry too much about that until you start studying for it. But the first exam is targeted more toward sort of the fundamental hardware characteristics and aspects of a machine, of a computer. And the second exam, the 1102, is a little bit more focused on policies, procedures, operational sort of day-to-day elements and aspects of it. But that can sometimes be a little bit of a surprise for candidates coming in who want to have that sort of ultimate goal of getting their A+ certification, to realize that they actually have to prepare for two different exams in order to qualify. The A+ is a pretty important certification to get because, as it says here, it serves as a gateway to a career, a rewarding career, hopefully, in IT support and beyond. And it provides a trusted way, and sort of an industry accepted and trusted way to kind of demonstrate that you have a certain level of knowledge kind of going in. This is the reason why they communicate this as a gateway to a rewarding career is because these give us a way to validate those fundamental skills, that what these components are, how they fit together and what role they perform within the infrastructure, and how to troubleshoot them when they stop working. As amazing as technology is, and all the great benefits it enables us to extract in our day-to-day life, it also represents some significant challenges when they stop working. We become so reliant on them that when they disappear, it feels very, very frustrating and disruptive. So we need to be able to acknowledge the fact and embrace the fact that at some point it's going to stop working, and we're going to need people with the skill set to be able to repair it and restore it back into operation as quickly as possible. And that's sort of what the A+ begins to help us communicate to others, that we have that skill set. And so the target audience for the A+, not necessarily exclusively this sort of target audience, but that's generally geared for people who are deciding to enter into the IT world kind of new. Right? They're fresh to it, whether they're deciding to change careers. You might be moving from one aspect of an industry into the IT world. And so A+ helps us establish some of those fundamental skills that we're going to build off of over the duration of the entire career that we have. So whether we're changing careers or we're just trying to get our foot in the door, the A+ can be a good way to communicate to like HR or hiring manager, that we possess the skills that would enable us to be successful in this new role. It also is well suited for people who are just enthusiasts. But the target audience, I've seen lots of folks coming through our A plus class that are not exactly new to the IT world. They're not exactly changing careers, but they just want to have that certification, that paperwork that shows that they possess the skill set. So that could be tech enthusiasts. That could be people that never really bothered getting the certification for a long time, and now all of a sudden their situation might change. I know for me that was certainly the case. I was in the IT world for years before I decided to get the A plus certification, and I got it because my needs changed, and I would benefit from having that certification, and so I did the same thing that any of our prospective candidates, students would have to go through. Reading the material, studying the material. I took a class from New Horizons, and that helped me uh, prepare academically, at least, to sit down and be successful in that exam. So while ostensibly the A plus is designed for those people who are trying to enter into the IT world for one reason or another, it's not exclusive to them. I've seen folks with 10 or more years of experience in the IT world from a uh, more of a real world perspective still get a lot out of these courses, because this is where, like for myself even, where I started to learn misunderstandings, things that I accepted as true that actually weren't all that true. And it helped me identify shortcomings in my own knowledge base that I gained over the years from a practical perspective. So while the intention may be geared more toward those entering into the IT world, it's other people can benefit from it quite a bit as well, because it does help us build that solid foundation. Um, uh, and sometimes improving the foundation that we already have. Um, the and It provides us with that sort of IT fundamental. Now, and just looking at Sergey's comment in the chat, um, the genuinely concerned about how to get a job with this. Everywhere you look, it requires experience. That that may be a challenge, but that's going to be a challenge. That's going to be a fairly persistent challenge. I don't want to say no matter what, but it's going to be a fairly persistent challenge. The type of certification you might get isn't going to necessarily directly attack the job requirement of looking for somebody with experience. The certification, regardless of which vendor, the certification shows that we have a certain set of skills that have been validated by an unbiased partner, whether that's CompTIA or Cisco or Microsoft. That just is that vendor vouching for a certain skill set that we're communicating to a hiring manager that we possess. So they're not having to take our word for it. And so the certifications are really, really good as an opportunity to sort of get your foot in the door, um, and as a way to have some other entity vouching for the fact that you have validated skills that could be put to use in a job. So this is from an IT perspective, more or less what they call, they're referring to it as an ideal starting point, simply because it is something that can be used almost universally. And I only say almost because I just naturally I'm not fond of using absolute language. So it's virtually a universal way to communicate, regardless of what ecosystem and environment might be invested in, that you have those fundamental skills that will allow for you and enable you to support it, whether it's a Windows-based ecosystem or an Apple-based ecosystem or some sort of hybrid Apple, Windows, Linux type of environment. It demonstrates that we have those skills. So regardless of that ecosystem, we have the information we need, the knowledge we need to be able to support it. Now, like I said, there are two different exams, and you have two different exams. The 1101, which is primarily the hardware aspect, and 1102, which is primarily the more operational aspect of functioning in an IT environment. The each exam is going to be detailed toward that those series of testing objectives. And help us be able to communicate that not only do I understand the hardware elements, but I understand the procedural elements, the operational elements that are required in order to maintain an ecosystem in an operational state. And so we can, if we have time when we get closer to the end, we might be able to explore some of those testing domains to give you a little bit more of a specific idea or understanding of what is actually validated. And to more directly address Stafford's question from a little earlier, he said he took the A+ back in 2022. Is it still relevant? Is it still good? Or do you need to retake it? Well, this is kind of an interesting thing. One of the circumstances that might sort of drive the decision making of whether you should retake the exam or not is sort of the age of the state of technology when you took it. I have friends who took the A+ back in 1998, and the context of when they passed that exam was sort of built around the state that technology had evolved to back in 1998. Would I consider their skill set that was validated from an exam back then still relevant today? Largely, no. There are in some ways, the technology really hasn't changed that much, but there are also some very, very significant ways where the technology has evolved, where that old certification isn't really communicating the same level of knowledge or same level of functionality that we might represent to an employer that a more current certification would represent. And so for people like that, for some of my friends, I absolutely would recommend retesting, getting a more current certification. But back in 2012, CompTIA made a change. I think it was 2012, 2011 or 2012. Some don't quote me on the specific year, but it's going to be near enough not to make much of a difference. They changed the way that the certifications were managed. So prior to that point in time, once you got a certification, it was good for life, and you didn't have to do anything once you passed it, once you took it. And that led to a lot of people out in the world with CompTIA certifications that really didn't have a lot of relevancy in the current market because of the difference in how technology has evolved. But back in the around 2011, 2012 timeframe, they changed it so that you have to renew your certification every 3 years, which is kind of a bummer from the perspective of a candidate, because now you have to maintain that certification instead of it being a set it and forget it type of solution. But you can maintain your certification, as Robert pointed out, with continuing education credits, or CEUs, continuing education units. So you can, if you can demonstrate to CompTIA that you have continued to learn and apply these skills, then you don't need to retest. So if you took your exam in 2022, you should, and I'm assuming you passed it, So you have that certification. Your certification is still valid. And as long as you're able to communicate to CompTIA that you're maintaining your skill set and you're learning, when new things are introduced, you're able to demonstrate to them that you're sort of maintaining that knowledge base, then you don't need to retake it. You only need to retake it if you allow your certification to expire after 3 years, and you're not maintaining that sort of knowledge base. So hopefully that's a good answer to your question. Um, that the relevancy in the current IT landscape of the A+ certification and really certifications in general. I like to think of this, and I tend to communicate this in my class in a very similar way, that your certification represents a specific type of knowledge that you have in a specific point in time, right? So like my friends who got their A+ in 1998 or the year 2000 and somewhere in that neighborhood, that certification represents what they knew in the context of that time. It doesn't really reflect what somebody knows in the present sense. But if you get the CompTIA certification and you maintain it, so it never, you don't allow it to expire, that allows us to demonstrate that our certification is more relevant in today's world. Does that make sense? Just want to make sure everybody's okay with that concept. Because by virtue of CompTIA making that change, I won't say immediately, but it had a pretty direct and very quick impact where the perception of the CompTIA certification went way up, simply because of the fact that you had to either recertify every year, which is a way for us to make sure we're able to communicate relevancy in our skill set, or you were able to maintain your certification by proving that you're staying relevant. Either way, when you have that current CompTIA certification, it communicates a much more relevant skill set to potential employers today than it did before they made that change. You can get them from anywhere. Like for me, by virtue of the way of what I do for a living, I'm able to maintain my CEUs almost just by doing my job. Um, I don't have to go through CompTIA. They definitely do offer, um, classes, and they offer options for you to be able to maintain your CEUs, but it's not exclusive to them. So you can see this sort of breakdown of the two exams. The first one, your core concepts, is largely focused on hardware, whereas the second exam is largely focused on software, operating systems, and policies and procedures. So when I recommend to any potential candidate, because when you start down this journey, I'll be completely honest, it can be a little overwhelming, right? Because you realize how much information you're going to have to consume, and how much you're not just going to be able to have to consume, but you're going to have to sort of make peace with it. You're going to have to digest it. It's going to have to you're going to have to carry it with you for a decent amount of time. It can be a little overwhelming. I liken it to, I'm hoping I'm not the only person in the room that's dealt with this, but I'm generally a fairly organized person. I like everything in its place, but on occasion, I have that room in my home that always seems to get chaotic and disorganized. Uh, and eventually it'll get so chaotic and disorganized that I just have to clean it. I have to get rid of we have to put everything in its place, clean everything up, make it presentable again. And when I take that first step into that room, it can be a little overwhelming, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I have so much I need to get done. I don't even know where to start. Can anybody else relate to that feeling? It's not just one room. If I'm being completely honest, that I would be able to relate to that as well. And it can be really overwhelming. Ultimately, Robert, does it really matter where you start? At the end of the day, probably not, if I had to guess. Right? What matters is that we get started, right? Um, but it can still feel really overwhelming. So what I like to do is try and give my candidates, my students, a little bit of a strategy on how to approach this material so that they can minimize that sense of being overwhelmed as much as possible. And that's why I say you acknowledge that you have to take and pass 2 exams. So I'm going to ignore one of those exams for now. Right? I'm gonna, acknowledge that I eventually have to address it, but to keep myself from being overwhelmed, I'm going to just focus on one exam at a time. And from there, I'm going to find out what are the specific testing domains that I'm going to have to understand, have to learn in order to pass that one exam that I've chosen to focus on. And spoiler alert, there are 5 testing domains on each of these exams. So I'm not even going to worry about all 5 of the testing domains. I'm only going to think about one at a time. The first testing domain that I get into might be general hardware uh, concepts. I'm going to make sure I have all of those general hardware concepts uh, understood and sort of well in hand before I move on to the next testing domain. I just sort of lather, rinse, and repeat that process. And it gives me the ability to sort of maintain that sense of always moving forward without having to take too many steps backwards. And I can tackle things iteratively, repetitively, without feeling as overwhelmed by it. So the uh, that's a decent strategy for how you can approach the process of making sure that you're as well prepared as possible when you sit down to when you make the decision, pull the trigger, and sit down and actually take that exam for real. Um, Now, there are some prerequisites that you need to be aware of when it comes to the certification, and generally it's mostly in the prerequisites are mostly in experience. So you need to have the ideally, they say that you need to have 6 months to a year worth of exposure to some of these concepts before you sit down to really um, uh, uh, not necessarily to take the class, but before you sit down to take the exam. In my experience, at 6 months to a year level of experience is not really all that necessary. It's ideal world, like perfect world scenario, sure. But I don't want to say countless people, but I've certainly lost count of the number of people that I've taken through the A+ journey who've had no prior experience whatsoever until they sat down to take the class. And I don't see a significant difference in the success rate, because at the end of the day, um, the uh, the point of these certifications is to address and establish sort of that fundamental knowledge base. And in some ways, taking somebody through who lacks some of that practical experience can be a little bit easier because you have to unlearn less. But um, the choice of words, and I appreciate that very much. I try to be cognizant of my word choice whenever possible, but I'm not always successful there. Is there a way to look up your certifications on the CompTIA website? There should be. I know from candidates today, you will create, like for instance, I create a CompTIA website or a login for their website, and all of my information related to my CompTIA certifications are all found there within the CompTIA.org account. And recently, even your course material, the CompTIA website has been completely revamped relatively recently. I don't want to say when, but it's been within, I think it's been within the last year or so, to be sort of this single pane of glass that you can use to get you completely ready for the exam. There are quizzes, there are practice tests, there are videos you can watch, there's access to the course material, there's access to the exam syllabus. It tells you exactly what type, what you need to be aware of, what you could get test questions over. It's really, really well designed. And you don't know me, but I don't say that very often. And you'll just sort of have to take my word for it. I don't say that very often about websites in general, but this one I wholeheartedly would give my thumbs up on it because it's cleanly designed, it's easy to navigate. You can get access to almost everything that you want, up to and including submitting your CEUs back to CompTIA to maintain that certification. It's pretty seamless. Um, so how often do they reformat the test? That's a little bit harder to answer, but because it's not like software development that generally follows defined um, life cycles, but it's usually about every 3 to 5 years, ballpark. And it I think it oftentimes it depends on how much sort of churn we see in technology. When we see, periods where there are rapid changes in technological innovation, that will almost, well, I won't say almost always, but that generally is a trigger that would require sort of a new version of the exam. This version that we're dealing with was introduced just last year. So I would expect this version of the exam to sort of be present for at least another couple of years before we'll get the next iteration. Um, you're welcome. Jamie said, what resources would you recommend for gaining or learning the information to successfully pass the test? Well, and I know this, you can, it'd be easy to dismiss what I'm about to say because I'm here as a representative of my organization, which is an authorized training organization for, among others, CompTIA. So it'd be easy to sort of dismiss what I'm about to say. But one thing I would 100% recommend is taking a class. You take a class with us because not only are we going to go through all of the individual testing domains that you need to be familiar with in order to be able to pass the exam, you're also going to be able to take advantage of not just my expertise or whoever it might be, but the collective body of knowledge of people in the room is also really, really important. You're going to find people in the room that have taken other exams and they'll have their own test taking tips. The instructor, of course, has been there and done that. So, we have the ability to kind of target your effort in ways that make that give you the most return on investment, I guess you could say. So we can highlight pain points, common mistakes that people make, things that you want to specifically focus on, things like that you don't really get if you try to go it alone. Or if you go it alone and try to prep it, you're just basing it off of the knowledge you have on the material you invested in, and none of that supplemental expertise that you can benefit from. So taking a class is a really good first step. And at least with us, our classes will come with all the course material you need, plus quizzes, practice tests, lab environments, so you can apply some hands-on learning as well. So it's not just, ideally, it's not going to be just death by PowerPoint. It'll be a lot of discussion, a lot of, as much hands-on as we might be able to fit into it, that sort of thing. Honestly, I know this also sounds like something that you could roll your eyes at, but I could not tell you. To be honest, the cost of the course, not number one, it's one of those things that can fluctuate a little bit, but also I do a pretty good job of keeping myself sort of isolated and separated away from the sales side of the organization. part of that's on purpose. I like to make myself available to them if they need my help, but I feel like if I can keep myself somewhat isolated from the sales side of the organization a little bit, then it adds a little bit more credibility to a recommendation that I make. So that it's a little harder to dismiss one of my a recommendation I might make as, oh, he's trying to push sales. Because that's not part of what I do. I don't I'm not here to push anything unnecessary. Um, so the courses can fluctuate in cost just based off of market and what other courses are selling for and things like that. Plus, sales or account executives, they have some flexibility. Sometimes they have flexibility and they might include certain things to sweeten the deal and remove other things depending on what your specific needs are. So I really can't answer the question. Somebody else in the room might be able to, but I don't have that knowledge. I don't have that information. Am I the instructor for this course? I am one of our instructors for the A plus and for most of the CompTIA stuff. Thankfully, you're not stuck with me. We have other options. So if you're like, can I spend a week with this guy? If you're not sure you can spend a week with me, then we have other options. But absolutely.
Fantastic. I did link to the course. If anyone wants to go check that out, we have it up on our website right now currently. And it looks like there's maybe one more question here, or a couple more, like how long
Uh,
is the course duration-wise, and is my cert no longer valid?
Let
Those
me
are
address let me address these really quickly. The course is going to be 5 days. It can be a little intense because in those 5 days, we're covering all of the material you need to be aware of for both exams. But it's this latest version of the CompTIA stuff. The material is condensed enough so that it's less overwhelming. So it's 5 days. It's a 5-day investment to take the course. Um, I recommend at least another 5 days of study before you sit down to take the exam, but that period is going to change depending on the individual. And Frederick, if you were certified in 2002, your cert is still technically valid because you certified at a point in time when CompTIA certifications were lifetime. So yours is technically still valid from that perspective. I would, if I were a hiring manager, I might consider it invalid simply because technology over the past 22 years has changed significantly. And your 2002 certification won't really reflect those changes. So it's one of those, yes, it is technically valid, but from a pragmatic or practical approach, maybe less so. And generally, Gregory, yes, in general, all of our sessions are probably going to be recorded. There are a handful of examples where that may not be the case, but generally speaking, yes. You're welcome. I think the
awesome.
course recordings are an invaluable resource and also something I should have included as a benefit for taking the course is you have those course recordings to go back to. You're welcome. All right, guys, that's all I got for you.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. This is a lot of great info as our audience is agreeing with. And if any of you guys need any more info on this topic, please don't be afraid to visit us at newhorizons.com. If you miss out on any part of this session, we will be sharing a recording with all of you in an email after the webinar for reference. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks again,
Man,
Scott.
Pierce Brosnan.
Oh,
Wow. I've gotten two really good compliments. I want to do more of these webinars.
uh,
I'm getting complimented left and right.
I'll have
Thank
you
you for
signed
that.
up. We got lawyer, politician Scott. We got
That's
Pierce
right.
Brosnan Scott.
Mariella, you said I had a cool name.
Cool name
So
Scott. All of it works. But thank you all so much for
I'm
spending some time with us today.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. Hopefully our paths will cross in a class soon.
Sounds good. Alrighty. Have
All right,
a
guys.
great rest of your day, everyone.
You
Bye.
too. Bye bye.